This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. Artificial intelligence. The media is filled with discussions of its potential to dramatically change our lives. It will increase productivity. It will relieve us from having to make mundane decisions. It will reveal heretofore unseen connections. Conversely, it may eliminate jobs, take away our ability to make complex decisions, fill the airwaves with misinformation, and even threaten our way of life. In addition, many think that artificial intelligence, AI, is just too obscure. It is frankly not that important to normal people and everyday life. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we're going to explore AI in the courts. Are there real, day-to-day applications of AI affecting courts now or in the near future? Is AI applicable just for large metropolitan courts, or is it also a tool for suburban and rural courts? Are there aspects of AI that courts need to safeguard against now? Here to discuss these questions are Kevin Bowling, retired court administrator for the Circuit Court in Ottawa County, Michigan. Roger Rand, information technology manager for the Multnomah County Circuit Court in Portland, Oregon. Roger is also on the NACM Board of Directors. Alan Carlson, retired court administrator for the Superior Court in Orange County, California. Stacy Mars, administrative director for the Alaska State Court System in Anchorage, Alaska. And Casey Kennedy, Director of Information Technology, the State Office of Court Administration in Austin, Texas. Thank you all for joining today's podcast. I want to name several functions that courts currently perform. In just a few words, can you describe one, is AI used in the function? And two, is an AI-boosted function worth investing time and money to develop, particularly for suburban and rural courts? Roger, pretrial risk assessment algorithms. What do you think?
Currently, no. So currently, the tool that's being used by our release assistance officers and our other pretrial officers is an input-output tool. So the officers are looking up criminal history data, looking up case history data, and filling it into essentially a type of calculator that outputs a score at the end, which gives them a guideline. And then that guideline still, there are other presiding judge or chief judge rules that come into place even despite that score. So it's sort of a help. But right now, there's no AI involved in, as far as I know, in any of the state courts or any of the federal courts being used. It's still a manual input-output procedure.
Kevin, automated court document filing and classification systems. I'm particularly thinking of the Palm Beach Court and the Maricopa County Clerk's Office.
I think those are both good examples, Peter. And I think as most court managers would recognize, whether AI is involved in these systems is going to be somewhat dependent on the vendors that are providing your case management systems, whether it's a homegrown legacy system or whether it is an off-the-shelf product that has been produced by one of the many case management vendors around the country. That answer will vary somewhat, but there's certainly some jurisdictions that have AI baked into their systems now. And AI can help with a lot of tasks that we're all familiar with, whether it's separating or analyzing or classifying e-filing documents by case type or by some kind of docket code. I think we're going to see more and more AI being used to extract data from unstructured documents that may come in so that they can read text and transform it into some kind of structured content that fits best within that particular jurisdiction. And I think we all understand that AI is great at sifting through lots and lots of information and identifying patterns or predicting what might come next. and even drafting documents in some cases. So in that respect, I think we're going to see more and more AI come in as people or various courts try to look at ways to improve access to justice and make the courts more open, if you will, to litigants with and without attorneys representing them. But like with all of this, I'm sure we're going to talk about more, there are ethical and legal challenges that are going to come along with that usage.
Is it worth the time and resources it will take for suburban and rural courts to develop AI in this area?
I think over time, we're going to see that it's not a choice. I think courts are going to have to deal with the fact that AI is going to come baked into a lot of solutions that they use for different types of technology. Many courts talk as if AI is not there already, but the reality is that it is. If any of us are using legal research tools like Westlaw or Lexis, it's already built in. So I think saying, and it's not a question of if it makes sense, it's more of a question of when and how are we going to best leverage the technology that's available to us. So again, there are going to be those issues, especially when we start dealing with confidential or sensitive court information. How far do we want the tentacles of AI in our court materials, where it could create some legal problems? And it looks like Alan wants to take me on that issue. So
not so much.
Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, not so much take you on. I think, looking from the perspective of smaller suburban courts, they're going to wait for the big guys to do stuff, if it's in-house developed, and they're going to wait for the vendors to develop things, if they've got a vendor-based case management system. But either of those happen, particularly the vendors, yeah, it's going to be there, because if they buy the, case management system, it's going to have that ability in it because the vendor put it in there on purpose, and so they can take advantage of it. It just means they're probably going to be slower on the uptake on doing that. I think the other thing is on this is the data analytics piece. When we have the ability to mine, so to speak, documents, we're going to be able to do a whole lot more analytics than we've been able to do so far. And I think really valuable stuff, like finding out how many parties are really not represented at some point in the litigation, and what kinds of cases are there really in the filings. Having filings under 25,000 as a case count is useless for planning. But if the AI can tell us, well, those cases include this percentage or this number of debt collection cases and this number of small auto accident cases, that's a whole different deal, because we can use that on our case management systems and our case management practices.
Stacy, automated chatbots for customer service centers.
Well, I'm aware of 2 locations that are currently using chatbots, and I guess I should probably start with what a chatbot is in case folks don't know. So that comes from chat plus robot, and if you mush them together, you get a chatbot. And basically, it's software that simulates like a human type of conversation through text or voice commands or both. And it's been more commonly seen in retail applications on websites. You probably have been surfing the web for some kind of product and had a little box pop up where maybe an avatar wants to see if they can answer your questions. So I'm aware of 2 courts in the US, and I'm sure there's more, that have been using chatbots for customer service purposes. One is the New Jersey state courts, and the other is Miami, the 11th Judicial Circuit. I don't know if they're using AI-based chatbots. I don't know about that. I'm sure if they probably started out not with using AI-based. What they were doing was creating kind of their own internal frequently asked questions that they loaded into the system, and so that the system would recognize the common questions and then spit out the answers. I imagine they're looking at, if they're not already transitioning to more sophisticated AI-based tools that can enable these chatbots to answer questions using a much larger, basically the entire internet-based training model. So I think that's really where the future of this is going using generative AI, where the training information is much more vast. Of course, with that, you get the risks that come with all of the generative AI, which is you might not get completely accurate answers. So what I think is probably the safest route at this stage is to have a more contained model, but you can use AI within it. And I think Casey Kennedy is able to share information about how you can kind of train your training information and use AI tools to respond in a conversational way using chatbots.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about chatbots, I don't know about you, but I think the last 4 or 5 chatbots I've used on commercial sites and then one in a medical situation were not very effective, very frustrating. And I realized, particularly the one with the medical one, that it's a learning process. And if we don't use it, we're not going to learn. So we need to have these things out there, but monitor them really closely and adjust them so that we don't drive away our customers saying, oh, this just doesn't work. This isn't worth the effort. They don't really care. I mean, it goes to a trust thing in the long run. So we have to be careful about that.
Alan, criminal sentencing algorithms.
I'm not aware that there's a lot of use of this. I think there have been attempts to develop something. I think the thing here is what's in the database that they built the tool with. You know, if you're going to base criminal sentencing on 1,000 cases in Florida and you're in Kansas, I don't think that's such a great idea. And I think it'll be really expensive, particularly for smaller courts, mid-sized courts, to get a database big enough and pay to develop a tool based on their own data. So I think that's going to be a hard one to propagate out into the field, even assuming judges like it, which is questionable for me based on all the judges I've known. And you also have the problem of bias. We haven't licked this yet. And I think the one that bugs me sometimes is people say, well, humans aren't perfect. Well, no, they're not perfect. So you say, well, then why should AI be perfect? And I'm going, well, wait. I want them to be better than humans. I mean, let's make some improvement here. Let's not just have a low bar of what humans do. Okay, we can do that well, that good in an AI. I don't think that's I mean, again, we need to play with it for a while, but to implement it widely, I think would be a big mistake.
Yeah, I've mused about this issue a little bit, Peter, as well. And one of the natural places that my mind has gone is looking at those jurisdictions that have robust guidelines that are in place, where they've got a lot of information that they've collected. There might be a lot of variable detail that's outlined, looking at past criminal histories and offense variables for whatever a person is charged with currently. There might be more information there to build out a model and let an AI learn a little bit more. But I agree with Alan. There needs to be still that human interaction with it to really pay attention to what's going on. And I think that's one of those critical roles we're going to see judges continue to perform moving forward.
Casey, automated voice to text.
Yes. So over time, what's happening is as that process continues, those changes that people make, or there's a feedback loop process to say, if the AI got this wrong, this is what it should have been. They can feed that back into the large language model to correct it, so that over time, much like we see anything with AI, it may start out at a lower percentage accuracy rate, but over time it will learn and just get better and better and better. And we see that with automated voice to text. As you said, you still need a human to go through it. I would advocate that we're still at that stage, but are getting much better. The other thing that we see, especially in places like Texas or the South, a lot of those applications aren't used to our accents. And so if you're from the Midwest, that's great. It can pick you up with a much higher degree of accuracy than you can do somewhere like, say, in East Texas.
Mm-hmm. Roger, tell us about the upcoming NACM AI Guide. When should we see it? How is it organized? And how will it be updated?
I'm excited to be working in a work group with the folks on this call, actually, on a guide for the courts on artificial intelligence that's due out in July of next year. So it should be launched at the NACM annual conference, which is in New Orleans next July. And this will be a digital guide. So many of the guides that NACM produces are in paper form or PDF form. This is meant to be a more interactive digital guide that will be available online. And it will also have the ability to be updated. So AI is changing so quickly, we want to make sure that we capture any changes, new features, or new ways it's being used in the courts as quickly as possible. So there'll actually be a link within the online guide to submit changes or edits or additions to the guide. That will be reviewed by the NACM Communications Committee and then updated to that guide as soon as possible. The guide will include a video introduction. So there'll actually be videos and hyperlinks within the guide, which makes this guide a little bit unique. And it will include definitions of AI and what AI is used for within the court system. And the audience for this guide is going to be court managers and court administrators. There will be some judges who are going to be interested in this, but NACM's primary audience are the court managers and administrators running the administrative side of things. And it will include some guidance on how those administrators interact with judges and train judges. It will also include practical uses in the court, so how AI can be used within the court, and we'll reference existing implementations in specific courts. And it'll talk about policy and data governance. Our COSCA colleagues who are with Stacy, and one of the state court administrator of Idaho is working on a policy paper for COSCA, and from that paper will be included in this NACM AI guide. We're also going to talk about the advantages of AI and how it can help improve the public trust and confidence in the courts by improving data accuracy and court efficiency. So a lot of good things coming in the guide, and we really hope to get this out quickly and be timely. So often the courts can be slow to change, right? They can be slow to get on board with new technology, and we just can't wait. There are so many things that assistive technology can help us with moving forward and actually allowing attorneys and judges to really work with clients and work with the public in a way that will make their experience for the court better than it has been in the past. So I'm really looking forward to the guide. I hope other people are as well. I think it'll be a really top-notch production.
Some aspects of AI are here now, and courts are going to have to decide how to deal with them. For example, one criticism of AI is that it occasionally makes up information in order to fill in gaps. These are called hallucinations. AI has been known to create completely fake legal citations. Now, if an attorney submits a pleading with such hallucinations, he or she would likely be sanctioned. How can a court guard against hallucinations if they're filed in court documents by self-represented litigants, particularly if they are filed in good faith? Roger?
This issue, I think, is specifically important to think about when it comes to self-represented litigants. The court is, what our role has always been is to resolve conflict. And within that conflict, there are issues of whether or not something is legitimate or not legitimate, whether a document is accurate or not accurate. And I think that it's most important to educate our managers and our judicial officers on what AI can do to help us and what AI, how it may present itself. There's a lot of talk about should the court actually get into the job of investigating whether or not a document that was filed or a photo that was filed in evidence is accurate or true, or was it a deep fake? One of the big concerns. And I think that there is the argument to that is that's not really the court's responsibility. The court's responsibility is to listen to the two sides of the argument and then make a decision about, a winner, decide a winner. In the case of divorce, for instance, you don't have any attorneys involved, and oftentimes it's two self-represented litigants before a judge. This is where the education piece comes in. And hopefully judges will be able to recognize if something doesn't seem right. One of the thoughts we've had as we've been talking about developing this AI guide is, with the idea of falsified evidence or deepfake evidence, AI may be able to help before the evidence is filed with the courts. So some of the vendors who work with our courts are help bring digital evidence into the system. And perhaps, this doesn't exist yet, perhaps they can use AI to scan that evidence to determine whether or not it appears that it has been altered from its original state, and then kick it back to the person saying, this appears to have been altered. You need to define or give a letter of explanation of why this document has been altered, or resubmit the original.
Yeah, I think that Roger touched on peripherally one of the important things to understand about the structure of our courts. We've always relied on the attorneys on the other side to evaluate things. Our understanding is judge can be neutral because the two lawyers can look at each other's materials and, hey, wait a minute, that's not right, kind of thing. But that breaks down if one side doesn't have an attorney or both sides are unrepresented. So we have to figure out if there's some role. I think there is, in the sense of a balanced result for the court to say, wait a minute, is this stuff for real? The citation issue is actually fairly easily solved. All you have to do is look, click on the citation and nothing happens, and you go, wait a minute, what's going on here? And we'll identify that if there's lawyers on the other side. And if in bigger courts you have research attorneys who are looking at motion papers, they're going to find that stuff, bad citations in a briefing or a document. The bigger problem is the pictures and videos and that sort of thing. I think one step, which is hard to implement but might work, is you tell the parties that they can't introduce a piece of evidence like that. They have to give the other side the same thing the day before or a couple of days before. So you at least give the other side a chance to say, wait a minute, that's not a valid video. Able to come in and challenge it with something. Or, Peter and I talked about, so the traffic case, somebody goes out and takes a picture of the stop sign that they blew and blanks out the stop sign, so it's not there. Well, if the officer has a copy of that video before the hearing, he can say, wait a minute, there's a stop sign there, and refute that when they come in. So you have a couple of ways that we're going to have to develop to allow people to detect things. The research I've seen so far is that AI is not very good yet at detecting fake stuff. That just means for now it's not. Given everything else, how fast it develops, it's possible people are going to have some breakthroughs to figure out how to identify false evidence.
Yeah, I wanted to quote one of the members of the AI Guide work group, which is Sarah Omen from the Idaho State Court Administrator's Office. She said, deepfakes are a new version of an old problem. Courts are all about process. AI may open up new processes, but why should courts address documents created with AI assistance differently than they did with other things in the past? And then someone else in the work group, I believe it may have been Stacy, put up a great old story of the ballpoint pen and the court's resistance to using the ballpoint pen when the ballpoint pen was invented, because how did we know that, that ballpoint pen was actually used by the person who was filing the document? It seems ludicrous and absurd now, but, things that were a problem or seemed like an obstacle previously, we've overcome those obstacles and we've moved on, and hopefully AI will be a similar way. We'll use these tools as assistive tools. They're not going to be obstacles.
Pete, if I could add one quick plug from the shameless marketing division of the Joint Technology Committee. We've all been talking about different issues relating with AI now, and Roger perfectly summarized what's happening with this work group that's going to develop a new guide. But things are moving so quickly, some of your listeners, some court managers or judges might find it helpful to look at some resources that have been developed for courts that are available right now. And if they were to look at the Joint Technology Committee's website and look at the various publications, there are publications that have already been done on chatbots and what they are and how they can be used. There's publications on digital evidence and some of the issues that have come up with them. There's a short primer on AI for courts, just to get an idea of what some of the terms are that are out there. And I think as all of us in the court world are trying to figure out where do we go next and how do we evaluate whether it's evidence coming in or new solutions from technology vendors, or some surprising occurrence that comes in through a virtual hearing, through online dispute resolution. There are a lot of resources that are out there right now and that are instructive. Some of them may be a little bit dated just because this technology is moving so quickly. But at the same time, there are those helpful resources available today.
Although not ready to replace interpreters in the courtroom, automated language translators are improving to the point where one state court administrator told me that she would permit customer service clerks to use them instead of language line at the counter. Should courts permit counter clerks to use language translators on their own smartphones instead of language line? Stacy?
I feel that AI translation is getting so much better in quality that I would be comfortable using it in some aspects. So I'm not saying we would be using it as interpreters in a courtroom setting, but I am comfortable using it at customer service to communicate with customers. You know, you brought up language line. So language line is one of more than, several language interpreter services that are done telephonically, where you generally pay by the minute. Those telephonic language services vary greatly in quality, particularly depending on the language, and they often don't use certified interpreters. We've, had definite problems with our telephonic language line. So, I know that Alan said often he doesn't like to hear the comparison about, well, humans aren't perfect. Well, I would say in this particular case, we're often not that satisfied with our telephonic language services. And I'm pretty satisfied with AI interpretive, or not necessarily interpretive, I guess, trans services where we're converting spoken to text. I read a really interesting article online from Wired magazine, and it was professional interpreters versus the AI challenge, who translates faster and better. And they had a couple of professional interpreters that were looking at speeches. So they weren't in the context of a court environment, but they were looking at real speeches that have been given in different languages. And they evaluated their personal version of how they would have translated that versus the AI translator. And they found that the AI translator what was better than they personally were in many circumstances. They did find a few shortcomings, but they were very impressed. And so what I'm most comfortable with, if we're doing interpretation, I'm not going to generally be ever at this point using an AI source in a courtroom. We may get there, but I don't think we're there yet. I would use it at a customer service counter where somebody is either reading off of what their phone said, or they're listening, because you can also have it be broadcast in spoken language, because not everybody can read. But what I'm thinking of is, if we're doing translation of, let's say, website content, some other written information that we have at the court system, of doing the initial translations using the AI tools, and then having the professional translator review that to make sure that it didn't miss anything in terms of word choice. Idioms are really difficult, even for professionally trained interpreters, because they don't translate literally usually from one language to the other, like it's raining cats and dogs, right? That's kind of an odd one. And our language is peppered with idioms. So I would really want to make sure that we had a human in the loop at the end to make sure that it works. But I think you could short circuit some time and effort by doing your first cut with an AI tool. And also at the customer service counter, when you're often in kind of a chaotic environment, you may not have a lot of time. You want to get the information to the person as soon as possible. I am comfortable using AI translation. And if you have traveled in foreign countries lately, I'm sure you have been impressed with the capabilities of your translator on your phone.
A potential that AI offers is the extraction of data from court documents, possibly even personal data. Should courts impose safeguards against third-party data extraction? And can they even make those safeguards stick? Casey?
So that's a big question. So obviously, when you're working with AIs, one of the things that you definitely want to do is to make sure that it's not necessarily a public AI. So in a lot of examples, and we're starting to see a lot of court IT folks toy around with the idea of where you can encapsulate the AI inside of your cloud tenant. So like either in AWS, Azure, Google has it too, to where you can take an instance of an AI and just point it at your court stuff and have it boxed in there so that it can't go outside of that. And that actually helps it from hallucinating against and making stuff up because it's looking at all of your court data and not necessarily letting that data go out in the public. So that's one way that you can control it, is you can, box in your data and then tell your own AI, just look at this and don't pay attention to anything else, and extract things that way. Now, as far as public extraction goes, I mean, the issue is if you have any kind of documents or images out on the website, on a website today, I know us technologists put in other safeguards, making sure that people are coming from, known locations in the US, or are downloading documents at a rate that is feasible for a human but not a computer, those kinds of things, to kind of safeguard it so that we can strike the balance between having data publicly available and having data automatedly publicly available, which would be much faster.
What is your advice to folks who are tuning into today's episode, who might be looking at the advent of artificial intelligence in the courts? Stacy?
I think the first thing I would say is you really need to start educating yourself. This area is really broad. It's changing literally every single day. And folks on this podcast, I know that we are constantly sending each other new information that we read in some source on a daily basis. And so there's new things coming out all the time. You can educate yourself by tools that exist right now, at least in the court environment. So the National Center for State Courts did 3 webinars on AI that are on its website, I think are really informative. Definitely stay tuned for what more is coming in the court community. And Roger mentioned and discussed a bit about the NACM user guide that's being prepared in coordination with the Joint Technology Committee. We also have the COSCA policy paper that's working on a white paper on policy considerations. The National Center for State Courts is standing up a Conference of Chief Justices and Conference of State Court Administrators rapid response team on artificial intelligence. And the goal of the RRT is to come up with proposed rules for courts who are thinking about AI issues. If you have tech folks that are working with AI tools right now, the National Center is convening an implementers forum. And that's a place that folks can bat around ideas about what they're doing and ask for feedback. And Kevin mentioned earlier the JTC paper that we put out in 2020 on AI. We're actually updating that right now to include new information about generative AI because it didn't exist when we wrote the paper just 3 years ago. So things are really rapidly changing. And I think the first step is really educating yourself so you have an idea about what this world is about, that it exists right now. It's really going to just, I think, change the legal landscape in so many ways, from what lawyers are doing to how the courts are operating. So there's really a lot of changes coming. And if you're doing any work right now that involves anything online, like if you're doing a Google search, if you talk to Siri, if you use Westlaw, Nexus, Microsoft Word, AI is already here. So you are using it whether you like it or not. As a community, I think we really need to think about the use of court data. for training AI and whether we want to have any restrictions on that, and particularly about sensitive information, confidential information, draft information. And we need to think about what we want to require of our vendors so that there's a common response across the court world about the kinds of information that we put into RFPs for requirements of vendors on the use of court information in training AI tools. But I do think that we really need to open ourselves up to the potential that AI has, I think, great capacity to really help us when we have repetitive, mundane tasks that can be done 24/7 outside of the court. And I know that I'm not the only one who has trouble filling jobs. And across the court community, I think we need to look at what could AI do that would be, equal or better than what our employees do, and what are the jobs that we can't quite fill, and then can we change the job descriptions of the ones we can fill to do the kind of task that AI isn't currently good at. So I think we really need to figure out what AI can be optimized for and then be open to using it.
Alan?
Yeah, a couple of things. The notion of being educated about AI is really important. And I think one piece of that is people need to understand also the underlying aspects. And I'm careful in using that word because really you need to understand the statistics and the math behind some of this stuff. And it's not that complicated. I think it's important for people to understand that an AI tool is only as good as the data that you put into it. So if you're going to use a tool, you need to know what's in that database, the training data that set it up, because it may not serve your needs if you discover the data's in a different set or from a different place or a different time or something like that. I think the other thing, picking up also what Stacy was saying, before you automate something, you need to re-engineer it. Let's not pave the cow path with AI. And we did that a lot in Orange at one point before we went fully electronic, was just going through all the processes and cleaning them up before you automate them. It's going to be easier to automate them because you're not doing silly things that you don't really need to do and you can't remember why you did them, but you've always done it that way. And I think that's going to be part of it. And when you re-engineer it, you understand the process better. It's going to be easier to automate it, I think. So that's what I would offer. And I'm looking forward to the guide having the updates and the references. Okay, if you want to learn something about this, here's an article, here's a place to go look, or here's another paper that's already been done to explain some of these details.
Roger?
I'm going to follow up on what both Stacy and Alan have talked about and how this can really help improve our data entry. So artificial intelligence is going to help improve data entry accuracy and quality control. I would recommend to people who are looking into this technology to really think about those straightforward, high volume e-filings that are repetitive and how much time they take our employees to receive these repetitive documents, for example, a declaration, or an answer, these forms that are relatively simple to see, identify what they are, and then to put them into the case management system. I think that those are really good places to start. And if we can have AI process those easy to process documents, it'll free up times for the clerks to work on more complicated filings that may involve a back and forth discussion with a filer. And yes, it will also help us with data analysis. I would encourage people to start thinking down and writing down all of those things that we can't easily track without time-consuming database queries and spreadsheet review. If we look at something like failure to appears across the board, how many people filed with this particular type of a charge who are charged with this particular type of a crime are failed to appear? What are the demographics of that person who failed to appear? What was the time of year? What was the time of day? All of these things that are simple questions that AI could quickly, navigate for us and get us the answers to. I also hope that AI will eventually get to a point where it's going to help self-represented litigants navigate their way through the legal system, especially those people who are seeking help in family law cases. There's so much paper to navigate and so many questions that can be answered And we have these legal navigators in our courts who work with these people, and they're very overwhelmed. And the people who are coming to us are at high levels of stress. They can't think clearly, and the people who are answering these questions are being traumatized by the information being presented to them. If we could have someone or an artificial intelligence type of generative AI working, that generative AI is not going to get tired. They're not going to get fatigued. They're not going to get tired of listening to someone talking about their very traumatic experience. And I really think it could help us help those people.
Casey?
Well, I think the first thing is to have a realization that it is coming and that it's not a fad. So everybody's going to need to figure out how they're going to deal with it, both on products coming into the court that may or may not have been either assisted or generated by AI, but then also court staff and what the appropriate uses of AI for your court staff are. With all of that, that requires thought. My general guidance would be to remember that all your other policies are still in play. So you definitely want to make sure that people know and understand data classifications and what they can and cannot put in an AI, especially if it's one of these more publicly controlled ones like ChatGPT. You definitely want your data governance rules applied so that people aren't doing things like putting in victim names or personally identifiable information and asking ChatGPT, which is a public kind of offering, to go in and get that, just because they're using everything that people type into that as more training data as well. So,
yeah. Kevin?
Pete, as I thought about this question, the way you posed it, I kept going back in my mind to a presentation that some of us recently saw or listened to and participated in at an AI summit that was hosted by the Arizona Supreme Court and the Arizona State Bar and Arizona State University. They had a couple of presenters there that were in-house counsel for the Ford Motor Company. And have been working in the AI field for several years, and are looking at it from the standpoint of how AI is impacting industry, how it's impacting the legal culture, and how it's going to impact courts going forward. And as they closed out their presentation, they said they felt that there was a mantra that we should all keep in mind, and that was 4 words. It was to embrace, educate, evolve, and empower. And with each one of those, they talked a little bit about embracing AI because we can't hide from it. It's not going away. It's here to stay. It's already baked into some court functions, and we have to recognize the fact that it's here, and that we're going to have to deal with it. And the best way forward is to embrace it and see how we leverage it in ways that are really going to make us more effective in serving the public that are coming to the courts. Everyone so far has talked about education, and they highlighted that as well. I don't know that I need to say more about that right now, but one of the offshoots or benefits of education is the third point they make, and that's to evolve, to stay ahead of the curve, to keep learning. Stacy mentioned, and we all smiled, that all of us are exchanging emails almost daily on something that has popped into our awareness about somebody doing AI research. And we were even laughing over the weekend because I found one article that was written by Pope Francis about AI and how it should deal with, how world leaders ought to be dealing with it and using it to move us towards world peace. So, it's touching lots of folks. And then ultimately, as we embrace it, as we educate ourselves, as we evolve, we have to remember to empower not only ourselves, which we'll be doing by taking on those first steps, but we need to empower those that we work with as well, our colleagues in the court system, to do the same. we've got employees that might be afraid of using AI one way or another, encouraging them to test it. It's the old idea of trust but verify. We want to watch out for those hallucinations that you mentioned earlier. So we can't just assume that everything is correct because it's AI. And as Alan mentioned, a lot of it's going to depend on how well the databases are that AI learned from, how that's going to dictate what comes out the other end. So, those are all things that I think that we can learn from, and perhaps if your listeners for the podcast think about it, embracing it, educating ourselves, evolving as we go along, and empowering others that we work with, that'll help put us on the right path for the best possible use of this new technology.
I want to thank Stacy Mars, Casey Kennedy, Alan Carlson, Kevin Bowling, and Roger Rand for their knowledge, their ideas, and their experiences with artificial intelligence in the courts. AI is likely to be the burning tech question of 2024. As always, my thanks to you court professionals for tuning in to today's episode. You always face new technological challenges with professionalism and competence. Thank you. Join us on Tuesday, February 20th, for another episode dealing with the issues facing our courts. This has been the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leaders Advantage is a regular podcast on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on YouTube, on Facebook, on iTunes, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is CLApodcast, that's all one word, @nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search through the entire episode to find it? The additional resources section of the webpage contains a question time marker sheet. Just find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can then quickly fast forward to that time in the episode and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.